Right now in your kitchen, there's a machine running that has not stopped since the day it was plugged in. It runs while you sleep. It runs while you are at work. It runs every hour of every day of every year for as long as you own it. And every single month, it quietly adds between $15 and $25 to your electric bill without you ever thinking about it. Over the life of that machine, which is approximately 14 years before it fails and has to be replaced, you will spend between $2,000 and $3,000 on electricity alone just to keep it running. Then you will spend another $1,500 to $2,500 to replace it, and then start the cycle again. Your grandfather never owned one, and his food stayed fresh for months. Not because he was lucky, not because he lived in a different climate, because he understood something about the ground beneath his feet that General Electric spent decades and millions of dollars making sure you would never think to ask about. The average American household spends $240 a year running their refrigerator. That is the Energy Sage figure for 2025, based on national electricity rates. An older model, the kind many households still run in a garage or basement as a second unit, can cost over $400 a year to operate. The average refrigerator lasts 14 years, according to a University of Michigan life cycle study. A mid-range replacement in 2025 runs between $800 and $2,500 depending on size and features. Run the numbers over 30 years. 3 refrigerators, $1,400 in replacements, $7,000 in electricity. That is over $8,000 to solve a problem your grandfather solved for nothing using a hole in the ground and a clay pot. In 1927, General Electric launched the Monitor Top refrigerator. It was the first electric refrigerator to see widespread household use in America, and the campaign they built around it was, in their own words, outlandish. Special railroad cars toured the country displaying refrigerators. In 1928, one was shipped to the North Pole as a publicity stunt. In 1931, the millionth unit was presented to Henry Ford during a live radio broadcast. And every advertisement, every promotional event, every cooking school sponsored by the electric utility companies in partnership with GE carried the same message. The old ways were unsanitary. The old ways were primitive. The modern American home had a refrigerator, and modern American families threw away everything their grandparents knew about keeping food cold because someone with enough money told them to. By 1930, 10% of American households had an electric refrigerator. By 1940, 56% did. An entire generation of women was re-educated out of knowledge that had kept families fed through every winter for 300 years. The first time I walked through a farmstead in Holmes County, Ohio, in the middle of July, I was looking for the refrigerator. There were jars of preserved vegetables stacked floor to ceiling in the back of the house. There were crocks of fermented cabbage in the corner. There was butter. There was milk. There were eggs. None of it was warm. None of it had spoiled. I walked the perimeter of the house twice. I looked in every room. There was no refrigerator. The Amish woman who lived there watched me for a while and then walked me to a door set into the base of a low hill at the edge of the garden. She pulled it open. The air that came out was cold. Not cool, cold. Inside, in the dark, on simple wooden shelves, were the same foods I had seen inside, preserved, cool, intact. The temperature I later measured was 38 degrees Fahrenheit. It was July. It was 91 degrees outside. The room ran no electricity. It had no compressor. It had no refrigerant. It cost nothing to build beyond the labor of digging it and the wood to frame the shelves. And it had maintained that same 38 degrees, she told me, every month of every year for as long as she lived there. Let me give you the physics, because this is not complicated. The Earth is a thermal battery. We discussed this in the last video in the context of air temperature, but what it means for food storage is even more practical. The University of Connecticut Extension Service documents it precisely.
Below 4 feet of depth, the ground temperature in most of the continental United States stabilizes between 32 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, varying from region but remaining constant year-round regardless of what the air above is doing. This is the same principle behind the Earth tube cooling system. The Earth doesn't heat up in summer, and it doesn't freeze in winter. It locks in a temperature and holds it. A root cellar is simply a room built into that temperature zone. The Woodstock History Center, documenting colonial American food storage practices, records that effective root cellars maintain temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, precisely the range your electric refrigerator maintains today. They also document a humidity level of 85 to 90% inside a properly built root cellar, which is the humidity your refrigerator's crisper drawer is trying to replicate with a small plastic vent you probably adjust once and never think about again. The physics of your refrigerator and the physics of a root cellar are identical. One uses a compressor, a refrigerant, a sealed system, an electric motor, and a monthly bill. The other uses a hole in the ground. The National Center for Home Food Preservation at the University of Georgia documents that cellars, caves, and cool streams were the primary food preservation method in America until mechanical refrigeration spread after World War II. Not because root cellars were experimental, because they worked. Because they had worked continuously since at least the medieval period in Europe and since the 17th century in colonial New England, where the Woodstock History Center records that almost every farmstead had one. Root cellars were used until the mid-20th century when home refrigeration became popular, not when root cellars stopped working, when refrigerators became popular. That is a different sentence, and it is the sentence that matters. Here is what General Electric's campaign did between 1927 and 1940, and I want you to understand this precisely because the mechanism is the same mechanism you saw in the last video, and it will appear in almost every video on this channel. Refrigerator companies in the early 20s launched what historians of home appliances describe as a massive campaign to convince the American homemaker to replace the icebox and the root cellar with an electric appliance. GE used outlandish advertising and public relations techniques, but they did not stop at advertising. The Smith-Lever Act of 1914 and the Smith-Hughes Act of 1917 had created federally funded agricultural extension programs, home economics teachers trained by the government to bring modern practices into American homes. Electric utility companies co-sponsored these programs. They funded cooking schools, they produced films, they paid for demonstrations in homes across rural America showing women how to use electric appliances. The message in every one of those programs was the same. The traditional methods, the root cellar, the spring house, the icebox, the fermentation crock, were old. They were the way people lived before modern science improved their lives. And the modern American woman owed it to her family to move forward. Not one of those programs showed data proving that an electric refrigerator preserved food better than a root cellar. Not one cited a study showing lower spoilage rates, because no such study existed. The root cellar had kept food at 38 degrees for 300 years. An electric compressor does the same thing at 100 times the cost. There was no improvement. There was only a campaign. And the women who were taught in those extension programs taught their daughters, and their daughters taught their daughters, and somewhere in that chain, the knowledge of how to build and use a root cellar slipped away from the American home so completely that today, most people standing on top of one in their own basement don't know it's there. The spring house is the piece of this story I found most remarkable. The Appalachian History Archive documents that settlers across Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina built small stone structures directly over freshwater springs, diverted through a channel so the water flowed under a stone shelf where the food sat. Natural spring water flows at a constant 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. The air inside a spring house, cooled by the flowing water below, maintained temperatures that kept dairy fresh, kept meat from spoiling, and kept produce cool through summer months that regularly topped 100 degrees outside. The Amish in Holmes County, Ohio, still build spring houses on properties where a natural spring exists. I stood inside one on a 91-degree afternoon and watched my breath mist in the air. Outside, the field was shimmering with heat. Inside, the temperature was 54 degrees. The food stored there was indistinguishable from refrigerated food. The cost of the spring house, beyond the stone and the labor, was nothing. The energy source was gravity. The maintenance interval was never. But the spring house required something GE could not sell you. It required a spring. So instead, they sold you a compressor.
Now let me take you somewhere most people have never heard of. A classroom in northern Nigeria, 1995. A teacher named Muhammad Ba-Ab was watching families lose their entire harvest every season. In a region with no electricity and no refrigeration, food spoiled within hours of harvest in the heat. Tomatoes that could have fed a family for a week were rotting in a day. Ba-Ab did not invent what he built next. He rediscovered it. He went back to what the ancient Egyptians had known 5,000 years earlier, that 2 clay pots and a handful of sand can keep food cold without a single watt of electricity. The device he rebuilt is called a zir pot. 2 unglazed terracotta pots, one smaller than the other. The smaller pot sits inside the larger one. The gap between them, approximately 2 inches, is filled with sand. Water is poured into the sand. A damp cloth covers the top. As the water in the sand evaporates through the porous outer wall of the clay pot, it draws heat from inside the inner chamber. The same principle your own body uses when it sweats. The evaporation is the cooling mechanism. MIT D-Lab, one of the most respected engineering research programs in the world, tested and documented the Zirpot system. The results? In hot, dry conditions, the inner chamber maintains a temperature 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the outside air. In ideal dry conditions, the kind you find across most of the American South and Southwest, the inner chamber reaches 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the same temperature as your refrigerator. According to Science in Africa, one Zirpot system can store 12 kilograms of vegetables and keep them fresh for up to 20 days. It costs less than $2 to build. It uses no electricity, it requires no installation, it fits on a countertop or a porch or a shaded corner of any room. Mohammed Ba-Ab won the Rolex Award for Enterprise in 2000 for this work. The device has been documented by MIT, by Practical Action, by Engineering for Change, and almost nobody in America has ever heard of it. Not because it doesn't work, because it costs $2 and cannot be metered or billed or replaced on a 14-year cycle. This is the part of the story that connects everything. The principle behind the Zirpot, evaporative cooling, was documented in ancient Egypt as far back as 2500 BC. Frescoes in the tombs of the pharaohs show servants fanning large clay pots. The Indus Valley civilization, which flourished around 3000 BC across what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan, used the same technique. Every culture that needed to keep food cold arrived at the same answer. The answer is the physics of the earth and the physics of evaporation. No electricity required. General Electric arrived in 1927 and told America there was a better way. The better way cost $8,000 over 30 years and required a service call every time something broke. The old way cost nothing, and nobody told you. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people with farmsteads or hillside properties, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You do not need land, you do not need a spring, you do not need to dig anything. I am going to show you 3 systems, one for your basement or crawl space, one for any apartment or rental, and one that works outdoors in any climate with no construction at all. Every single one costs under $20 to build. Not $20 a month, $20 total, once.
Here is System 1, the basement corner root cellar. Almost every house built before 1980 in America has a basement or crawl space. That space already sits at the correct temperature for food storage, between 40 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on your region, for most of the year. You're not using it for that. You're using it for storage boxes and old furniture. Here's what you do. Find the corner of your basement that sits against two exterior walls, ideally a north-facing corner if possible, away from your furnace or water heater. This is the coldest corner of your existing below-ground space. Build a simple insulated enclosure. 4 sheets of rigid foam insulation, the kind sold at any hardware store for $10 to $15 a sheet, cut to fit a corner space approximately 4 feet by 4 feet by 6 feet tall. Frame it with basic lumber or simply stand the panels against each other and tape the seams with foil tape. Add a simple wooden shelf inside to hold produce. Drill 2 small ventilation holes, one near the floor, one near the ceiling, to allow air circulation. Without ventilation, moisture builds and mold follows. For temperature control, add a small window or vent that opens to the outside. In winter, crack it to bring cold air in. In summer, keep it closed and let the earth temperature maintain the interior. The University of Connecticut Extension Service, in its documentation of cold storage systems, notes that a properly managed basement root cellar can maintain storage temperatures of 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit through most of the American climates, without a compressor, without refrigerant, without an electric motor, without a monthly bill. Total cost of materials? $20 to $60, depending on size. A standard refrigerator costs $800 to $2,500 plus installation and runs for 14 years before you repeat the expense.
Here is System 2, the Zir pot for anyone with a countertop. This is the system that Mohammed Ba-Abba built for $2 in Nigeria that MIT later validated in their D-Lab research program. Go to any garden center, hardware store, or pot shop. Buy 2 unglazed terracotta pots, one approximately 16 inches in diameter, one approximately 12 inches in diameter. Unglazed is essential. The porous clay is what allows the water to evaporate. A glazed pot seals the surface and breaks the mechanism. The cost of 2 terracotta pots between $4 and $12, depending on your location. Place a small layer of sand in the bottom of the larger pot so the inner pot sits level. Place the 12-inch pot inside the 16-inch pot. Fill the gap between the 2 pot walls with clean sand. Pour water slowly into the sand, enough to dampen it thoroughly without pooling. Cover the top with a damp piece of natural cloth or burlap, not synthetic fabric. Natural fiber allows the moisture to pass through and continue the evaporation. Place your food, produce, root vegetables, eggs, dairy in a sealed container inside the inner pot. Set the whole system in a shaded area with airflow, not in a closed room, outdoors in shade, or near an open window where air moves. In dry climates, and this covers most of the American South, Southwest, Midwest Plains, and Intermountain West, the inner chamber will cool to between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Under ideal conditions, 40 degrees or below, the same temperature as your refrigerator. In more humid climates, like the southeast coastal regions, the temperature drop is smaller, 10 to 15 degrees rather than 40. In those conditions, use the Zir pot for short-term storage of produce, while using your basement corner system for longer-term storage. MIT D-Lab documents that a Zir pot keeps vegetables fresh for up to 20 days in conditions where the same produce would spoil in 48 hours without any cooling at all. Refill the sand with water once a day. That is the only maintenance. The pot does not break, the sand does not expire, the physics does not change. This system will outlast every refrigerator you would have owned for the same period. Here is System 3, the spring-style water channel for anyone with outdoor space and a water source.
You do not need a natural spring. You need access to a water supply, a garden tap, a hose, or a nearby stream. Dig a shallow trench, 6 inches deep and 12 inches wide, approximately 4 to 6 feet long, in a shaded north-facing area of your yard. Line it with stone or brick. Allow water to run through it slowly, not fast, just a trickle, so the stone stays continuously wet and cool. Build a simple covered box of stone or cinder block over the channel. 2 layers of block on each side, covered with a flat stone or wooden plank, sealed against insects. The interior space, cooled by the running water below, maintains temperatures between 40 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on your water source temperature. This is exactly the system Appalachian settlers used to keep dairy and meat from spoiling, documented by the Appalachian History Archive as having been in continuous use from the 18th century through the mid-20th century, when electric refrigeration ended the practice. Not improved it, ended it. Cost of materials? $0 if you use fieldstone collected from your yard, or $10 to $20 for cinder blocks from a hardware store. Before I give you the number that changes this permanently, I want to hear from you. Drop your location in the comments and tell me, do you have a basement, a garage, or outdoor space? Because the system I recommend for you specifically depends on where you live and what you have available. Your answer helps me help everyone watching this. Here is the number. A standard household refrigerator running at the national average electricity rate costs $240 a year to operate. That is the Energy Sage figure from 2025. Many households run a second unit, a chest freezer, a garage fridge, adding another $100 or more annually. Over 30 years, $7,000 in electricity to run appliances with an average lifespan of 14 years. Add 2 refrigerator replacements at $1,500 each. Over the course of 30 years of keeping food cold, the average American household spends between $10,000 and $12,000. A basement corner root cellar? $60 once. A Zier pot? $12 once. A stone water channel? $20 once. None of them require a service call, none of them fail after 14 years, none of them add a line item to your monthly electric bill that you stopped noticing because it was always there. The root cellar in Holmes County, Ohio, that I stood in on a 91-degree July afternoon has been maintaining 38 degrees for longer than anyone currently living there can remember. No motor has ever been replaced, no refrigerant has ever been recharged, no compressor has ever been serviced. It does what it does because the physics of the Earth does not break down. The average refrigerator lasts 14 years. The Earth has been holding its temperature for longer than recorded history. There is no comparison. The only reason you didn't know this is that one of these systems generates $12,000 in revenue over 30 years, and one of them generates nothing that can be billed. GE needed you to plug in. The Earth has been waiting for you to dig down. The Amish woman who showed me that root cellar in Holmes County, Ohio, did not learn about it from a book. She did not read a study published by the University of Connecticut. She learned it the way everything the Amish know gets learned, standing beside someone who already knew it, watching what they did, and then doing it themselves. Her mother showed her. Her grandmother showed her mother. The knowledge arrived in Ohio from Pennsylvania, from Switzerland and Germany before that, from every community of people who ever had to figure out how to keep food cold without paying someone else to do it for themselves. General Electric launched its monitor-top refrigerator in 1927, and the campaign that followed, railroad cars and radio broadcasts and federally funded cooking schools, reached every corner of rural America within 20 years and taught 2 generations of women that the old ways were over. And the old ways were not over. They were just no longer profitable for the people running the campaign. In 1930, 10% of American homes had a refrigerator. In 1940, 56% did. In the decade that followed, the root cellar disappeared from almost every American farmstead that was built from scratch. The knowledge survived only in the communities that never plugged in. The Amish kept it, the Appalachians kept parts of it, and now you have it. And you do not need a hill, you do not need a spring, you need a corner of your basement, a bag of sand, and 2 clay pots. The knowledge was always yours. GE just made you forget to use it.